Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Solutions with Courtney Anderson. I am your host or hostess, Courtney Anderson, and thank you for joining me. Our show today is entitled Myth Warriors. Target. I can't go on. I can't go on. And so, of course, whenever we have our Myth Warriors show, we're always trying to find a way to be assertive, to be focused on outcomes, and to, be a warrior, to attack these things that might be in our way or might be something that has created negative outcomes that we have to really head on, battle, war. So our target today is the myth, I can't go on. And this one's a little bit heavier, I think, than some of the other topics. And one of the things is I've looked at sort of relaunching this part of my work and rebranding and branching into some different parts of what I do professionally. I want to be a little bit more holistic. Certainly, I'll always be happy and a great resource for sort of the harder skill part of what I do, so hiring and firing and management and legal issues. I want to integrate more, like I said, of a holistic 360 approach, because I've spent all these years going into, I think, year 15, and a lot of the things that negatively impact people, which negatively impact organizations, they're not hard skills. It's not because someone isn't a good engineer or not. They don't know their accounting content, or they're not good at understanding retail organizations. It has to do with sort of where the rubber meets the road, and these inter and intrapersonal issues that these myths can destroy people. And so, like I said, being more holistic, we're always in my practice is going to focus on sort of the nuts and bolts part of it, the content part. I mean, do you know what your legal requirements are under XYZ law? But I know I've done enough field work that's not all of the problem. So there's always going to be the content part, but we also have to work on the other part of it, sort of the soft skill part. What's going on that's preventing someone from surpassing their goals? And like I said, often it's not the content part. They really do know sort of what they need to know for their work. The problem is they can't apply it. And why can't they apply it? What's stopping them from applying it? Well, these myths, these internal narratives that we all have them, and if we don't examine them, if we don't make a decision, like a conscious decision that we're going to delve deeply into these narratives, then they just sort of keep playing. They just play every day. Sometimes every day, all day. And if we don't address it in an aggressive way, that's why we're warriors, right? Then it's not going to change. It's sort of like it's a horrible analogy, but it's sort of like, a song that's just stuck on repeat, and all you hear is the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. You either need to, change the song, or you're not going to change your outcome. So the one today is the myth that we're warriors, that we're addressing is, I can't go on. And let's kind of look at this big picture. One of the things in the show description, I talked about an event. I remember an anecdote, which again, anecdotes aren't worth much, other than they do provide context and they help tell a story, because they're tied to sort of a real thing that triggers a memory. And sometimes they can help people understand the outline of the story. So I'm a big proponent of them. They're good in storytelling. So a few years ago, I gave a keynote speech. Don't ask me where. I can't remember. As I shared, I used to travel a lot. In my heavy travel days, I was traveling, flying and speaking all over, I think 300, plus days a year. So I was just going. So I gave a speech somewhere. I don't remember. I do remember that it was a pretty good speech. I remember like I was feeling good, and then I sat down after my big speech on the dais. I sat down at like this sort of round table because they were going to have like lunch or I guess probably lunch like after my speech. So I sat down at the big round table, and I do remember I was feeling good. So if I'm feeling good, it was in my mind it was a good speech. I grade my speeches based on what I think, not what the audience thinks or not what anybody else thinks, or what I think. So I remember I was feeling good, and I was sitting down, and now I could relax, right? The work part's finished. Now I'm going to sit here and eat. The food, it was probably chicken, as it normally is. And, just be happy. Just feel good, like, good job. So there was a businessman that was there at the table. So he was some sort of senior person at, whatever group this was. Which I don't remember. I don't even remember the client. So I can't remember if it was a specific organization. I'm actually thinking it was like a conference type thing. So I think it might have been a certain industry, but there were like all these different types of people there from all different types of organizations. Anyway, so I'll never forget though. So I'm feeling good. I'm feeling like yes, right. And he leans over and I said he snarled at me because that's at least how I'm remembering all these years later. And he said something pretty close to, if not verbatim. He said, "I bet when you go home at night, you kick your dog." Right? And a couple of things immediately hit me. One, which I noted in the show notes and these episode notes, was that normally I don't get that feedback. Normally I don't get the argument that I'm, Mary Sunshine, and that I'm up there, with all this sort of hot air, about we can do it, and that I'm like too nice and too sugary and saccharine. I usually get feedback that I'm too mean. And so actually, in a way it was refreshing, right? Like that's, it's nice to hear something different. And I actually don't think at all that I'm ever mean at all. I think I'm pragmatic, and I think that, clients and organizations historically, they pay me to come try to like change behavior and fix things. So I can't not take that seriously. And I come from a background certainly as a lawyer where real life is hard. Real life is not a joke. Real life is it can be brutal, and it can be painful, and all the horrible things that exist in society. I've seen them and dealt with them, and it's not funny. So sometimes when I talk about things, I come from a place of a real place, and I find that to be, I think that's fine. But you get the spectrum of feedback, right, no matter what you do in life. So the main takeaway from that moment, I thought, beyond the fact that it was a nice, refreshing thing to hear that I'm, too sweet, too nice, was that my interpretation of the message of the content was that it was a fraud, right? That I went up there on stage and I was like, yeah, I don't remember, whatever it was I did, something like, because it's always the same message, right? Like we can change and we can do it, and it's about choices and all that kind of stuff. So whatever it was I said, that his argument was, yeah, you were up there and you were smiling and you were all energetic and all this kind of stuff, but the reality is, when you go home, behind closed doors, the real evil and bitterness and horrible, reality of life comes out, and you kick your dog. And that is interesting to me, because I actually often talk about that in a lot of my work, is that there's a huge disconnect with a lot of people between sort of what they put forward to the world and then what's really going on. And a lot of my work, I get to see like the real deal, shall we say, behind closed doors, because when you're a lawyer, the lawyer gets to, I don't see the facade. I see what really, the bad thing that happened, that either got you arrested or that's coming out in your divorce proceeding or whatever, and it's not pretty, it's ugly. And I agree, actually, with the gentleman who made the comment to me that the majority of people, this is totally anecdotal, but the majority of people I think actually it's a fake. They're out and about and they look normal, right? And I think what drives a lot of our media, and myself even, these stories where it's like, something horrible happens and they go to the neighbors, which is, I never get, like, really? But whatever. And then the neighbors are like, oh, you never would have thought that they would have done that. They just look so normal. What does that mean? Right? Like, but there's a lot of either cognitive dissonance, which is where you think one thing but you do another, right? So like somebody truly in their heart, thinks all people are equal, but then they're in some sort of group where they're forced to go around and say horrible things about a certain, ethnic or racial or gender group or whatever. And it's cognitive dissonance because they don't believe it, right? But they're saying it, and that creates sort of a short circuit. This is me generalizing this, but it creates sort of a short circuit in your brain because it's like, when you say it, it's not true in your world. Like, it causes a conflict. So part of it's that. And I think the other part of it is that I think many people they're in a position where they take in what they perceive other people think about them to a way larger degree than I think is accurate. And so it leads to all of these behaviors you see with, all the way from young people with peer pressure and bullying, all the way up to, senior adults, right, in a nursing home, and there's still that same peer pressure. Nobody wants to sit with somebody at the table, or the group ostracizes somebody, or people make fun of other people. It's not the best part of our sort of human species, and a lot of that behavior is sort of the idea of the group dynamics and this idea of what you think you need to do to conform, so then you do these things. And sometimes there are good outcomes, right? Like sometimes, okay, I'm conforming to the speed limit because, it's the group norm, or I'm conforming to, not singing loudly off key in public because it's the group norm. I mean, there are good outcomes of this, but there are a lot of negative ones too. And so the issue that the gentleman was saying is that, like, I'm just pretending and lying, and then the real mask will come off when I go home and I'll hurt my dog. Now, the thing that I didn't like about what he was saying is that, first of all, my dog, at that time I had my other dog, my miniature Dachshund. He's passed away. Now I have my Chihuahua, and then I recently added my Pomeranian. But my dogs are my loves. I mean, like, what? Kick a dog. I mean, the idea of that makes me want to throw up, right? Like, I don't know. What? No. Like, violence, no. And to an animal, no. And are you insane? That kind of, bothered me. But the bigger issue is, I put the quote in the show episode, and it's, it's a Kurt Vonnegut, who's a, world-known author. I strongly recommend, I noted in there, if you haven't read any of his works, I strongly recommend just part of Know Your World, right? It's important, I think, just for your literacy as a person to try to learn all you can about, the world. So there's going to be, art and literature and all types of things that it doesn't hurt you, and why not learn more? It gives you more context, and it also helps you better process your own critical thinking to see how other people think. So anyway, but Vonnegut has a quote that's something like, be careful what you pretend to be, because you are what you pretend to be. And that's, I think, ties into what the kind of comment I got was that, hey, look, you're pretending to be this, optimistic thing. The reality is, like, everyone, you're bitter and evil and horrible, and, when you go home, you kick your dog, or if you had, a child, you probably do horrible things to your family or whatever. I understood his point, and like I said, I do actually agree that the majority of people, I think, do have a lot more disconnect between their public self and their private. I just see it. And again, I could be skewed in what I see because, of course, I was taking work where bad things happen to people. And, people don't hire lawyers most of the time unless something either work-related, which is just sort of a public thing anyway, or it's a private bad thing, right? Like you've been arrested, or you're being divorced, someone's filed divorce, or whatever. So when Vonnegut talks about pretending to be, the idea is that even though in our head we might think I'm just pretending, other people do believe that, right? They buy that stuff. And that's why I referred to, the idea in the show notes of the emperor having no clothes. It's the, the old tale of that everybody, the group dynamics can be so powerful that people will convince themselves of anything, even though they can see with their own eyes, like, that's not accurate, but they'll just sort of go along to get along. And like I said, and often, in many instances, that helps society, right? Like, it's benign often. Like, oh, okay, I'm not going to, run around screaming and shrieking just randomly, because it would disturb other people, and the group dynamics kind of prevent me from doing that, and I'll do that when I get home. So it's not necessarily harmful, but there is a real issue where it can be. And one of the things that this myth, where people start to express they just can't go on, sometimes people just say that sort of for attention, right? Like they're really just frustrated. So I go to an organization. The organization's in the middle of restructuring, which is a nice euphemism for more financial trouble. So we're going to have to dramatically change things. Or it's already happened. They're in distress, and so they're having, reduction in force, another euphemism for people who are going to have to go because I can't afford to keep them on. And people just have massively high anxiety in those situations, right? Because, you don't know. One of the things in some other programs we're putting out have to do with this idea when you put all your eggs in one basket in terms of, work and income. So if you only have one income and it's just like this one job and you're not sure what's going to happen, it puts you in a really precarious position of, I'm going to go from, X number of dollars every payday to potentially zero, and there's nothing in between that. Like there's no cushion if you don't have any, other income streams or anything. It's really precarious. So I concur with the idea that there is a lot of pretending to be just among humans in general. I actually think one of the things I'm, somewhat personally pleased with myself is I think I try to keep that to a modicum of destructive behavior. So I don't yell out loudly, off key in public because, it's a benign kind of thing and it would give me, a headache probably. But in the thing where I would go out into the world and pretend like, oh, here's what you need to do to run your business, or here's how you can overcome these obstacles for your goals, and then I go home and I'm just a disaster, right? Like I beat my dog and I just am self-destructive. And we see that all the time in public, people who are some sort of politician or, person in the public eye, and then it comes out that behind closed doors, they secretly were doing all these other horrible things. And then part of it is seeing that is like, oh, okay, well, it kind of, I think, helps the rest of society think, well, no one's flawless. And, it teaches people that, you can't get away with that kind of stuff. And, we're all equal under the law, ideally. Right. But I also think it teaches people to be just total cynics. And I think that it also, if you're so cynical that there's no hope and it's all a sham, I think people can get in a position where they really do feel they can't go on. And like I said, sometimes people say they can't go on, but they really mean that they're just spent emotionally at that moment. Like their business, like I said, it's restructuring, they're doing reductions in forces, and there's a lot of pressure. They don't really mean they've given up on life. They just mean that at the moment there's a lot of problems and change, and they're just stressed out. So when someone, has that myth, I can't go on, I've got to do all this work, and they're laying people off and all that, and they don't really mean that they're out of reserves, and that they just mean that at the moment the situation is stressful, then I don't, again, think that this myth necessarily is that harmful. Like everything else, one of the foundations of all of the programs that we do is, if it's perception is reality. So if you're stressed out and you're overwhelmed by the work transition and you feel like, oh, I just can't take another second at work. Okay. But you go home and you're living your regular life, right? So you're feeling good about, whatever it is you normally do, whether it's, play with your dog or take a nap on your hammock or, daydream or whatever. Like it's not a pervasive, all-encompassing, I can't go on. It's just at work at this moment, I'm stressed out, but when I go away from there, I'm fine, right? And I'm with my family or friends or with myself and my, whatever it is makes me happy. I'm watching TV, or reading a book, or taking a nap or whatever. So if it's not like your whole life, but it's just like that one little part of it that's causing all the stress, right? Then you're okay. And then the other situation, sometimes people's personal life, right? Maybe someone's going through a horrible divorce or something, and their home life is a mess, but then they go to work, and that's kind of normal. So it's not 100% of everything. They feel like they can't go on. It's just there are these specifically traumatic or stressful things that are happening, and it's a normal reaction to just feel like I'm at my end with this thing, this divorce or this restructuring or whatever. But you go to the other parts of your life and you're still, okay, then this myth necessarily isn't going to result in the worst outcome. It's the other type of scenario when it is encompassing, when every single thing somebody does, from the moment they open their eyes, when they wake up, to when they go to sleep, they just feel every moment of that they can't go on, and it's at work, and it's at home, and it's with their family or friends, or it's with them by themselves, or even if, they're with their pet cat or whatever, like they always just feel all the time I can't go on. That's the more seriously destructive thing. Because if it's an isolated issue, just your work or just your divorce, but everything else is okay, you sort of can draw reserves emotionally from the areas of your life that are that are still, functioning, right? So work's horrible, but you come home and, I got to spend time with that great, person I care about and I feel better. Okay, great. It's when you have nowhere to go sort of recharge your batteries or any place to reach for emotional reserves, and you're running out of everything. And that second scenario, when it's everything from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep, you just feel the whole time like you can't go on and like there's nothing that can be done, is when you're in trouble. And that's where the concept of being a warrior is really not a joke. Everybody has their own path in life, and everybody has their own perception of everything, right? So perception's reality. If it's real to them, it's real. You can't argue with somebody about, you shouldn't be so sensitive or that's not that big of a deal, because it doesn't mean anything. They are that way. They feel that way. And when you say they shouldn't feel that way, you're invalidating them as a person, right? And when you do that, what else do they have? That's why these arguments that people have, at work, when someone tells a joke and then someone else says that they're offended, and then people at work say, well, they're just too sensitive. You don't have a sense of humor. You can't take a joke. You're no fun. Well, that's irrelevant. Everybody has a right to have their own sense of humor and their own sense of, what they think is, right and wrong and all that stuff. And if you're not talking about a work-related thing, then you really don't have the right to force them to listen to your sense of humor. And if they ask you to, not say that around them, then don't say it around them. This isn't difficult. And when you get into that argument about, well, they're too sensitive or they don't have a sense of humor or whatever, you're denigrating them as a person. They have the right to feel whatever it is they feel. And, and this isn't about, you're not talking about work or dealing with work. You're just talking about your own personality stuff. So they have the right to feel what they feel just like you do. All you have to do is respect them and just don't say or do that thing around them. This is so simple. I have no idea to the day I leave this world, I'll never understand why these harassment cases are, just leave it alone. You know what? They have the right to feel what they want and think what they want. The concern we're worried about here is, again, this isn't somebody who only feels in part of their life that they can't go on, meaning that they're just at kind of the end of their emotional reservoir in terms of that issue. It's just, it's stressful, they're not sure what's going to happen, whatever. But when it's 100% of their life and they start to feel like I really can't go on and there's no respite from it, it's just, it's at work, I feel like this. It's at home, I feel like this. If I'm not working, I'm constantly beating myself up, why am I not working? If I'm in school, I'm constantly feeling like I can't go on, it's too hard, or I'm not doing, what I could do, or I'm disappointing myself or someone else. And it becomes like this, sort of all-encompassing situation where people get tunnel vision and they really start to feel like they can't go on. Obviously, some people, that might be some sort of a medical condition, so you definitely want to reach out to a healthcare provider or a mental health care provider. It's real. It's real when there's a mental health, just like any other health issue. Sometimes you don't even know you have it, and you go and you get good treatment, and boom, okay. Oh, well, now I realize that wasn't, accurate. That myth, I can't go on, was just sort of, maybe either, biologically or something wasn't firing right, and there's all kinds of treatments. But as a warrior, my bottom line is this. There should not be a time when 100% of your life is not functioning and you feel like you can't go on. There has to be some reserve somewhere for you to draw from. And like I said, if you're in a situation where there's nowhere to get space to breathe and to try to recharge your batteries, then you're putting yourself in a precarious situation. Now, I'm giving one exception would be young people who are minors. So you're a young person and you don't have control. You don't legally have the control to, get your own place, and you're not emancipated and you're underage. Then sometimes you can get in a situation where it's just horrible at school, and it's horrible at home, and you really don't have a lot of options because you legally can't, get a full-time job or sign a lease or whatever and get your own place. So in that situation, depending on how severe it is, if it's really severe, like, physically you're not sure you're going to make it, then I'm going to, again, ask for you to try to reach out for help. There's all sorts of social services and systems, but like anything else, there are humans that run them, so, people drop the ball. You have to, again, be a warrior for yourself. Sometimes in life, I think we all, at some level, have the fantasy that there's going to be somebody else who cares enough that's going to step in and help. And many people, I know, I've met them, have that. Some people have it everywhere. At work, they've got some great, boss or a mentor who's constantly concerned about them and checking on them and, looking out for them and supporting them and helping them. And some people have a fantastic, personal, family of either family of origin, or they've gone out and created a new family, and everyone is just loving and supportive and non-judgmental. And, so a lot of people have all those reserves, and they tend then to be able to handle, outside events better, because it might be horrible at, something that's happening, in their business, but they go home and they have all this love and affection and support, and that helps them. They can draw from that, right? They can draw energy and they can draw strength and everything. But there are other people who don't have any of it. And I shared an example of sometimes a young person, because a lot of times when you're legally not able to go out and do what you need to, right? Like finally get a full-time job, take care of yourself, and you're stuck in a situation where, maybe the school situation is awful. And if your home situation is horrible and you have no support there, it's quite possible that you're in a situation where you have no support anywhere. And you're really, on your own. My argument is that's okay, and you can make it. And that's not unknown. I mean, there's, how many stories are there about people in these situations throughout, written human history? So you can't give up on yourself. I mean, sometimes your reserve and the only thing you have to draw from may just be you, and you may be all that's there. And if that's the situation, then you really have to step up. And you have to be, I've said this in speeches for years, right? You got to be your number one fan. You got to be your number one cheerleader. I mean, if there's literally nobody but you, then you gotta work 10 times as hard, and you gotta just tell yourself constantly, like, yeah, I am here, and I deserve to be here, and I'm valid, and my feelings are valid, and you have to really believe this, and then bide your time. Like I said, if it's a physical health emergency, you don't think you're you're literally going to be able to live, then you really need to call law enforcement or social services. You need to be aggressive about it, right? Because you're fighting for your life, and I've lived long enough and seen where that happens, and you got to sometimes just fight yourself. I need help, and somebody's going to have to step up, and this is my life's on the line, right? But if it's just something maybe where emotionally it's horrible, you think physically you're getting food and you think you're going to be okay to make it physically, then I say to get through it. Knowing that you're alive, and as long as you have food and nourishment and shelter, you can get to a point where you're going to get just the calendar days are going to be on your side. Time's on your side. You'll get old enough, and then you're going to be able to go out and get your own place legally and work, and you'll be free of that stuff, right? But for adults who have the situation, you're old enough to get your own place, you're old enough to be free, I'm just begging you. This concept of building up your reserves is everything, and you have to take it seriously. And again, with the exclusion of someone who's unable to, because either of age, they're a minor, or maybe they have some sort of condition where they're under the legal guardianship of another person or a court. Absent that, you need to take your rights and you need to exercise them. And you've got to understand, you absolutely can go on. It is 100% a choice. And, we have so many examples in history, of people, like a Nelson Mandela, and there's also sorts of examples of people who just knew they could make it, and they did, through, prison or torture or whatever. So I'm begging you to do a couple of things. Acknowledge that if it's just part of your life where you feel like you can't go on, that'll pass. If you start to get to a point where you feel like there's nowhere in your life that you can breathe, there's nowhere in your life that you can get respite, you don't feel good anywhere, then you have to really pick up your weapons and be a real serious warrior and create a space for yourself. So in your head, you need to be your number one cheerleader, and then you need to start to make tangible steps to create a safe physical place for you to live, where there's at least that space is your space. Your space. And no one's going to come in there and be anything but positive. And if you don't know anybody positive, then you're going to be happy in that place by yourself. And that'll give you the reserves to get out there. But I certainly have survived enough and know enough about life. If you really feel that you can't go on, it's a myth, and other people suffer if you give up on yourself. I encourage you to, again, be a warrior, be assertive. Join us at CourtneyAnderson.com with your suggestions and feedback, and I thank you so much for joining me for this episode. Thanks.